Hello, let's talk earnings on S&P 500. Currently, early January 2025, S&P 500 is about 6,000 or so. Let me share my screen. I've got the top bank forecast for 2025. Some banks have 18% growth, other banks have 5% growth. Let's figure out what the distribution looks like. Let me share my screen. Okay, here we go. Oppenheimer is leading the way out of the gate with 7,100 as a forecast for the S&P 500 in 2025. That's about 18% growth. Wells Fargo, Yardini Research, and Deutsche Bank all kind of rounding out in this 7,000 range, which if we look at like 7,000 over 6,000, that's 16% growth rate. Year over year, which would be a market-beating growth rate. If you think of like the long-term average of the S&P 500, maybe 10% or so, they're saying 16% growth. That's 4 out of 20 or so banks. That's kind of a small number of banks. You've got this cohort here, I would say between RBC Capital Markets. You've got Evercore, Barclays, Scotiabank, Bank of America, HSBC, BMO, and SocGen. They are all in this 6,600 or so, which is basically 10%. They're kind of hedging you to say, hey, the market's going to perform on average like it has over the last decades. You're going to get a 10% return. And then you've got some of the biggest U.S. banks, Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, Morgan Stanley, Citi, and UBS, all saying it's going to underperform. Right, that's sub 10%, 500 on 6,000, slightly less than 10% for the underperformers. So this is kind of the distribution of returns or targets for the S&P 500. Let's see what happens this year. Very interesting year. Super growth focused administration coming in. Hopefully we can unlock some deregulation, thin down the government. I'm very curious to see what the spending cuts do to the economy. Currently we are spending, I want to say 6% GDP more than we generate. So as they cut back that spending, that's going to be it's going to pull back on the economy. So you need the private sector to then take over and compensate for that to get the growth. But good luck in 2025. Let's have a great year. I'm going to crank out some videos going forward, get new cash flow models out. Appreciate everybody and have a happy 2025.